So let me start. Welcome. Good afternoon. Yep. This is Rosemary Dawson, Chief Executive of
Reid here, MPI.
Yep.
We have a webinar today, and as this is a CBAFF meeting, we are reminding everybody that there must be no discussion of prices, surcharges, fees, costs, particular customers, revenues, market shares, or any other commercially sensitive topics. And in particular, I'd like to remind you that no market agreements have been or will be decided at meetings of CBAFF, whether they involve prices, amount, or areas. I'd like to make you aware that such behaviour outside of meetings is prohibited, otherwise it could cause immense damage to CBAFF and or your company. Should it be apparent that at this webinar, there is an attempt to make or discuss an open or hidden agreement regarding price, amount, or area, I'm obligated to intervene. This is most unlikely to occur because everybody that is participating in the meeting today has been muted by our administrator. If you're wishing to ask questions, please use the chat facility and or put your hand up, and we will enable that to we will ask those questions, and if it appears appropriate or necessary, Laura will, as administrator, will invite you to ask the question in person. First up, we have Dunya Hazenkamp speaking, and so, Dunya, are you ready to talk? And I'm sorry, I don't know which one is you because I've got just phone numbers here and everybody. Yes. Thank you, Dunya. And Laura is going to put your slides up.
Okay, thank you.
This webinar is being recorded, and that will be made available via the CBAFF website. Thanks, Dunya.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Dunya from Target Evaluation. I'm the manager for the team, and I've interacted a lot with you over the last couple of years. And so what I'll do right now is do a very short overview. I think I've been given about 5 to 8 minutes to do a quick overview of what's happened with the last BMSB season. So let's get started. I'm just clicking to slide 2, which is talking about the general informational review of the 1920 season. Basically, it's been a pretty straightforward season. We experienced a much better alignment between our groups, better alignment with the agents, with having a little bit more pre-season activity. We had the improved queue management process. We also had the pleasure of introducing 13 new staff into our team in August last year, which fully became operational in November, and we'll talk about that a bit further in the next slides. We also had the unfortunate event of the COVID-19 impacts, which saw 90% of our staff working from home. I believe that was on the 25th of March this year when the lockdown on level 4 began. So we'll talk about that, but generally with the COVID-19 stuff, you'll see that the outputs by the team were maintained, if not bang on, when it comes to operational performance targets. I'll just go to the next slide, which talks about the season volume, comparison of first air and sea lodgements to MPI in the 18 to 19 and 19 to 20 season. I made these graphs because I wanted to show you what the volumes look like compared to last season. And it gives you an understanding of what we go through volume-wise every Christmas and BMSB season. So the BMSB season, as you know, goes from September to the end of April. I don't have the April data in here yet, but you can basically see that when you look at the first submissions for sea in the 18 to 19 period, it runs well below what we experienced this year when we had extremely high levels of applications. In November, we hit 12,821 applications coming through for that month. Obviously, the effects of COVID can be seen when you look at the sea freight. There's an intersection there between the grey line and the blue line, where you can see that around February, it was the first time in the 12-month period where we significantly dropped down with the volumes in sea freight applications. I can say they're still running slightly below last year at this point in time. Also, the AF number, it's just a little graph there with the AF9 number. That was actually exactly the same as last year's, direct correlation there. So it's good to see the agents using the AF9 scheme, and we've had a few more applicants again, so it's a growing scheme. The next slide is around the turnaround of lodgements. Probably the most important slide and story to tell this year is our business day is a 10-hour day. It's from 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock every day. When you look at the right-hand side of the slide, it's a little grey field. It shows you 3 hours for the first submissions, 21 hours for sea freight first submissions. So when I'm talking about operation performance targets, I mean that 80% of our first submissions with sea freight must be processed within 21 business hours. So in effect, what that translates to, because a business day is 10 hours, it's 2 days and 1 hour. It gives us the third day to complete applications within time. So what happened this year was an interesting story, is that I did a forecast for the agents beginning of September right through the BMSB period, to say that in the busy months of the year, you can expect a turnaround between 3 to 6 days. That generally held true for the months indicated, and then when you see the improvements in December, they started in November when we started to increase our operational performance targets. You can see that, for example, in November, we had 58% of the first submissions in air hitting a 58% target, and then in December that went up to 91% of air applications were processed within time. And it's basically the same, we're reading it for sea freight as well. So you can see that although the 80% trend was fairly low in September, October, November, it was basically a dual effect of the number of lodgements going up and my 13 new people starting beginning of November. So what you have is basically 13 people starting fully on the queue in November after their training, because they joined in August. August, September, October is the training period, then they go on to full shifts. So what you see is, as soon as these 13 people come on, there is a improvement in the performance all round. But also what the agents this year experienced, I'll give you a bit of a couple of statistics as well. Last year, the longest average turnaround for a month was 16 days in December. That was in the 18 to 19 BMSB period. It took 16 days to actually turn around a BACC, and that's what caused the delays and the frustrations. This year, the absolute longest that I can see from my statistics was 7 days, and that occurred in November. Everything else was pretty much either within 6 days or well meeting the almost 80% and 100% of the time. So as a success story this year, you can see we started the season fairly strongly. Throughout the months, you can see it going down September, October, November. We experienced quite a strong dip because of the volumes going up and not having the staff on the front line. Then what you see is a really strong return to meet our performance targets pretty much bang on in December. So December, January, February, March, April, which is 5 months of the 8-month period, we had an extremely strong performance. meeting the targets pretty much every week. I kept an eye on it every week. Other contributing factors to the better management of the season was potentially the Australian queue, and that agents basically experienced the BACC, having the BACC before the cargo arrived. So we made an emphasis to keep an eye on Australian sea containers. And that was, you know, when I did my little spot checks throughout the season, the Australian containers seemed to be processed within the 3 days, or slightly earlier than everything else, sea freight related, to make sure that you had a BACC before the container arrived. You can see that although COVID hit us in March, April, May, June, our performance, it didn't affect our performance at all. The team worked from home and did an extraordinary job of maintaining that and making sure the services are continuous. I'll go to the next slide. Just a couple of observations from the 18 to 19, 19 to 20 VMP season. I promised you that I would send out industry notifications on a weekly basis with a forecast, what to expect for the week and the coming weeks. They provided to be accurate. As I said, you know, you can expect a turnaround between 3 and 6 days or earlier in the busiest season. And with, you know, once we hit the December, January, February period, that was reduced down to 1 to 3 days. That generally, I think, helped agents, and I didn't hear any complaints around the way we helped industry to, you know, organise their logistics around that. We also made a real effort this year to release the draft standards for VMP and Sea Co. In an earlier the better time period on the 14th of the 5th. We released it on the BMSB industry survey. We also made an effort to engage with you to seek feedback. I think we had around 40 responses for that, and I will engage further with CBAFF on what you're saying in the BMSB industry survey. There were some very good comments that I'd like to explore a little bit more. And there's also potentially quite a few things that are resolved with the new VMP standard. Over the last 8 months, the CEC's, our Customer Inquiry Centre, answered 4,460 inquiries around BMSB only. And the standards team, which is Penny and Paul Hallett's team, is answered 597 specific inquiries to BMSB related cargo. For target evaluation, we saw that priority clearances and the queue priorities were maintained. The volumes in the manifest inbox, I think last year we had 300 in there. This year there was less than 50 every day. The Australian, as I previously mentioned, the Australian queue was managed well, and there's no complaints from industry. And I must say I haven't received any demurrage in storage and detention claims for MPI. So that must mean that although we have new people in the team, they have made a real commitment to double check things before they hit the send button and double check their work and make sure that everything is on track. So it just shows that overall is that there is a strong engagement. It seemed to have worked quite well this season, and haven't received any, you know, we continuously work stronger with that. The last slide is compliance. Just a bit of statistic there. We screened 10,644 lodgements in relation to the VMP standard. We generated out of those 528 BACCs with hold on board. And that was mainly because agents didn't have the evidence or the offshore treatments in time at the first time of lodgement. And then furthering on from that, 500 of these were resolved by submitting the offshore treatment certificates. So it just shows you that there's 500 instances where if we would have had the offshore treatment certificate, we would have been able to help you first time around rather than the second submission. With compliance, less than 2% of VMP consignments were assessed by the standards team and fumigated on arrival. We had a number of circumstances where CTO directions had to be issued. So, you know, it's a vast turnaround from what we experienced last year, where in the 18 to 19 season, I know it seems very far in the past, but we had you know, we had 99.4% of consignments were treated onshore. And we had those numerous issues with increased waiting times and pressure on treatment providers and logistics chains, and this year was so much smoother, and it just goes to show that it can be done. We did have the curveballs of, you know, the offshore treatment providers, some of the cancellations, we had the COVID stuff, you know, it didn't help agents at all, but we did well generally, and it worked. It just shows you that 98% were correctly, you know, directed. With Sea Co, we had, you know, all the Italian containers had to be fumigated offshore. And sensitive cargo, we had a sensitive cargo list of what that was, what sensitive cargo entails. And we basically directed 1,740 of those. I am told that the forecast for the 19 to 20 season was around 11,280 containers from Italy. So you can see that around 18 or something percent is actually sensitive cargo, which was devanned in New Zealand. And then also, you know, with Sea Co, we had a few non-conformances, where 89 of those, 11,000, you know, were basically held on board because there was no treatment conducted offshore. So generally, look, in closing, giving you that overview, the season has run well. I think brokers were better equipped this time around, and we're still continuing to improve our services, and we'll work with you to achieve that before the next season starts again. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Dunya. We'll hold any questions to the end. And can I now invite our next speaker? We've got Erin McElwain. And so, Erin, have you got a presentation?
It's James here. I'll be taking Erin's spot, and Laura should have the presentation.
So Laura's got the presentation, and thank you, James. Just
let me know when it's up.
It's up now, ready to go.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll probably just go straight into the second slide. Just a quick intro. I've spoken to you in previous seasons at these forums, which has been really helpful. So my name is James Reid, and I'm the team manager for North Ports and Offshore Programs. And for us, that means, for BMSB at least, represent the border, inspecting the containers and the goods that are coming through and the cars on board the car ships. And overall, the season's gone very well from our perspective. We've managed to keep the bugs out for another year. We have had a few come in post-border, but that's to be expected, and those have been tracked and traced and dealt with. We've had a lot less found at the border overall, and we've really seen the industry step up, and so that's been really good. So on slide 2, the main point here is that we're looking in the right places, but we need to keep looking. We need to make sure that goods that are at risk of VMSB continue to be low risk, and that treatments and other things overseas are working. So one of the big changes, as Dunya mentioned, was all offshore treatments instead of onshore, with very few circumstances where onshore is allowed. So together with our different parts of MPI, with Paul's team and Rachel, who's going to be speaking after me, visited the EU in September and November last year, just to get some additional confidence around the treatments that were being done there. So that worked very well. Also, we did thousands of containers, as we have done previous years, that were inspected to make sure that there weren't any bugs there. And this last season, we inspected them to make sure that the treatments were working. We did over 100 car ships and none were directed out. So that's a great result. I know Australia didn't quite have the same outcome, and in previous years for us there's been quite a bit of action at Auckland Port. And I guess together we've all managed to keep BMSB out, and accredited people at transitional facilities and ships crews have been doing a stellar job there. I think AP, so accredited people, they accounted for 1,500 detections. So that's a really good job there. And we've also got an expanded surveillance program as part of our post-border team, where we're monitoring around 80 sites across the country that are higher risk for BMSB. And not many things are getting through, and those activities are working well. So we'll just go to slide 3. So following on from that, the things that are working well at the border. Last year we implemented no BACC, no discharge for break bulk car ships. We also did the same thing around containers that were non-compliant, that were on board container ships. And it was quite a big task, but together, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone in CBAFF. You've definitely made a huge effort to make sure that imports are compliant before they get here, and we've only turned away very few non-compliant cargo. So it's been really good to see the shipping lines as well raising the bar. The vehicles and the vessels are immaculate. They're the cleanest they've ever been, and so that's a really good sign that people are stepping up and making sure that they're aware and doing the right things. We also had a really good awareness campaign, both continuing our cargo one and through Facebook and other sites like that, media articles, but there was also a big push around airports and making sure that we had people greeting at the gate for international flights that had arrived, showing them posters and pamphlets around BMSB, so flights from America, for example. And that actually led to a few BMSB detections. People opened their suitcase, and these were the bugs that they'd seen when the friendly quarantine officer at the gate greeted them. And then we got some calls. So I think that's shown a lot of support out there with the public. And we've continued to be fairly pragmatic and solutions focused. We realise that sometimes there are things outside our control that mean that cargo is not quite compliant, and we have been able to apply that in a number of cases to keep goods moving through the border. I'll just move on to slide number 4. So this is a few of the interceptions and where they came from, some data. So if you have a look at those graphs, the first one, the interceptions itself, you can see the yellow bars starting to show at the start of the season, October, and then that goes through January and then through into April. That matches previous years as far as shipping times and everything else. We expect to see more bugs found in cargo in New Zealand over Christmas and into early January. The good news is, if you look at the graph below that, you can see the grey line. You can probably barely see the orange line on top of that. The orange line is the live finds. The grey is the dead. So that's a great story. The offshore treatments are working, and there are still bugs there, but they're dead. And confirmation that those are working is dead bugs. So that's really good to see. Overall, we have 73% reduction in live bugs compared to the previous year. So we're actually seeing that these things are working. And if you go into the left-hand side, into the right-hand side, you can see what countries those bugs came from. So you can see that Italy accounted for about 61%. 20% is unknown, but that's because they're found largely on vessels, and we can't pinpoint those bugs back to a particular import or country because it's non-containerized, and so on and so forth below that. So that shows that our interventions and our targeting through the standards, through Schedule 3 countries, high-risk countries, are working. I'll just move on to slide number 5. So some of the challenges, and a lot of these are the same challenges that we had last season, so they're not new. Making sure that we know the compliance status of cargo in advance of arrival is really important, so getting those applications in as early as possible is key. If we don't know that, there can be delays at the ports, for example. So we continue to work through that. It is a manual process still, and that's just the reality of working with many different shipping lines and different parties through the supply chain. Our controls previously had moved from the place of first arrival, so Auckland Port, for example, back onto the vessel, and the shipping lines have stepped up a lot, and we're seeing them taking action en route at hub ports to make sure that only compliant containers are loaded. So that's working well, but it still remains a bit of a challenge for industry. And a lot of what drives us here is that we don't have many options on arrival. We can't treat many containers. We can't treat or contain non-containerized cargo. And we're very confident after the success of this season and our audits at the end of last year in the offshore treatments across all Schedule 3 countries. But it is important that we continue testing and checking that those treatments are working. It can be difficult to say, is it a failure of the treatment or is it a recontamination issue? And I believe Rachel will go through that in a bit more detail in her presentation. And monitoring cargo compliance. We want to make sure that we've always got the finger on the pulse, so if there's a new risk on a new commodity or pathway, that we're ahead of it. So let's move on to slide 6. So looking ahead, we're going to continue what we've done from last season. So we'll be continuing the no BACC, no discharge. We're going to continue maintaining assurance of offshore treatments. It might be a little bit challenging with COVID that we can't go back over to places like Europe, but we've got a lot of plans well in hand there. We're going to continue our interventions, and you'll see more targeted inspections, but hopefully a few less across the board again. We were a lot more targeted this season, which has worked out well across both goods that are exempt cargo that need an inspection on arrival because they're exempt treatment, and those that are treated. So just going on to slide 7, what we ask from you, just a reminder, and I know you're all experts at this now, but know the rules and make sure you put in place the right arrangements up the supply chain to make sure that things are compliant before coming, and that includes transshipping cargo that's going through Auckland, say, through to the Pacific or onwards from New Zealand. Make sure that you continue your communication with your clients. The more people who know the rules, the better. I think it's also important to, if you've got any paperwork or communications that you use, that they're up to date for the latest season. Including looking at exempt goods, make sure that you plan ahead. They might change, and I know there's more thorough information that Rachel's going to take us through next. And submit import entries early, and if at all possible when you're talking to your clients, if they can segregate and ensure the cargo doesn't get reinfested, that's going to give them more options on arrival. And lastly, on the last slide, I think it's slide 8, last time we had some helpful tips, so we just want to go through that again. There is a web page for approved treatment providers. If you're not sure, you can go there to find that out. It's on our public page. Pre-screen treatment certificates, check the rate, the duration, and the post-treatment timeframes to make sure that you're compliant and that there's no issues before shipment. Sign up to the notifications. I think Dunya provides quite a few useful information there, and from time to time there's operational updates as well, so make sure you sign up to those. And as I said earlier, making sure that you're talking up the supply chain will help ensure that you have the most reliable and hassle-free border clearance process when you get here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Again, no questions at this moment, but we've got time at the end for questions. Next presenter is Rachel, and I thought I heard James mention somebody else was going to be speaking, but So the floor is yours now, Rachel, and Laura, I presume, has got a presentation. Yep, here it is. It's ready to go. And we're on slide 1.
I believe Rachel's dropped out, so she's dialing in again.
Okay, thank you, James. And it looks like the presentation is dropped off as well. Just while we're waiting for Rachel to come back on board, you may all have seen a notification that that MPI are seeking submissions on changes to the import health standard, and CBAFF will be making a submission. If you've got any comments on this, we have shared the contact details and the information about the import health standard. So the changes that have been brought and are suggested to for incorporation reflect learnings that MPI have had from this year and previous brown marmorated stink bug seasons. And feedback or comment that I've had so far is that MPI seem to be learning from the experience, and that the standard is much more user-friendly than it has been. So I hope that that's going to be, the outcome of this is going to be good news for everybody. But we will be making suggestions and would love to hear from you if you've got any input. So I'll encourage you to check out the draft, and when we share the PowerPoints that have been used today, we can also share the information as to the links for that the draft standard. And my recollection is that submissions close in September. That seems a lifetime away, but hey, we're nearly halfway through the year. So Rachel, are you on board now? No. Is there anybody else from MPI able to pick up this presentation? She is talking about the import health standard consultation.
Yeah, I think she's just still logging in, because she's just texted me.
Oh, has she? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, she says she's on mute.
Laura, are you able to unmute her, please? Right, looks like that's happened.
Hi, so I've just added, I think it's Paul.
Paul Hallett.
Paul Hallett?
Yeah. Paul, I can see that you've come on. Are you going to be presenting on this, Paul? You've been unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now.
Yeah. So if Rachel can't get in, I can cover the slides for her.
Excellent. Thank you. So Laura, are you able to bring those? There you are. This is the Import Health Standard consultation screen slide is up now, Paul. And so we're on slide 1. So if you'd like us to whiz to slide 2, then ready to go.
Wonderful. Yep. If you drop to 2. So what won't change, I suppose, is the big thing. We'll still continue using the measures that we had in place this year, and that's via both the import health standard for vehicles, machinery and parts, and sea containers. So that's our primary measurement or tool for managing BMSP risk. So there hasn't been addition of new standards or any real additional measures there. So the next slide. The big thing, I suppose, and Rosemary touched on it, is we've taken on board quite a lot of feedback and tried to change the layout of the standard so it's easier to follow, and it's clumped machinery types, and so they're found in one place instead of having to go to multiple places. So we've used a commodity type standard. So hopefully that makes it easier to work through and easier to find the product that you're looking for. Also, some commodity type lists have been expanded to provide as much inclusion and exclusion examples as possible. There'll still be things that we haven't quite managed to capture, and so we do encourage people to check with us and to verify and use that online tool as well. Next slide. So what have we done? The changes, we've added 3 countries, Moldova, Portugal and Ukraine. Australia's also added those 3 countries on. Primarily we've added them because there's been records of BMSP found, or they're next to countries where populations of BMSP are exploding, and so there's no official trapping or management processes in countries, so they're probably there already if they haven't been reported. We've removed the 21-day rule before arrival of treatment for fully enclosed containers, and you just need to be aware of what we define as a fully enclosed container. So open tops are not, even if you have a tarp across them, they must be all covered. We believe that once containers are treated and sealed, BMSP would not be able to crawl out if there was some in there, or crawl in. The vents are too small for adult BMSP, and the adult BMSP is what we're targeting with our treatments, as that's the life stage of the bug when they hibernate. Yep, next. New vehicle type exclusions have been part of the BMSP management for the last 2 years, being removed. So all new vehicles will require BMSP management under the proposed standard. And there's some exclusions remain for lower risk new machinery, new tyres and new parts. This reflects the manufacturing process and how they're stored and how they're managed. We have made the manufacturer's declaration mandatory for declaring that it is new and it's complied with the rules. This was a form that was put together last year, I think, with CBAFF as well, and it was well received. And so to standardise it, we've just put it into the standard, so there's surety around what it looks like and when to use it. Next. Used vehicles from Japan that are not passenger vehicles, buses, trucks, camper vans, caravans, won't need to go through the MPI approved used vehicle management system. These are things like motorbikes. Motorbikes don't have spaces or hidey holes for BMSP to aggregate in. And so the management is slightly different and the supply chain is slightly different. So we've recognized that. They still have to comply with the requirement to be clean and free of and be subject to whatever verification is in place. But it's just recognizing the difference in the commodity type. But they do still need to meet the BMSP management requirements during the season. Yep, next. Minor changes, rewording for the residual insecticide treatment have been made. This is for importers of aircraft and watercraft. So previously we required treatment provider to do the on arrival treatment. We've removed that to allow, there's some practices that we weren't quite aligned with. And so this allows the importer or their agent to actually use the residual sprays and apply it. It'll still be subject to verification and whatever checks on arrival to make sure that it has been done. Yep, next. Labelling requirements have been removed. There wasn't a lot of uptake on this, so instead of keeping it in there, we felt that it was better just to remove it, and we can check the documentation as necessary. Next. Standards are online, has been mentioned several times. We do encourage you to submit. Have a good read of the risk management proposal that shows our thinking and the reasons why we've made some of these decisions. If you have any queries or questions, do drop us a line. We're more than happy to give you some more background if it needs. Consultation finishes mid-July. So that's 60 days worth of consultation time to align with WTO requirements. But you do drop us a line and we can help you if needs be. Thanks for your time. I'm sure Rachel would have done a better presentation than myself, but she'll be available for questions, hopefully. Thanks, Rosemary.
Thanks, Paul. And just checking on the list that Dunya has sent through. Dunya, who's up next? I've got Shamal, Cherie, and Howard. No?
No, they are just there to be participants, to listen in.
Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you very much. And so that's the end of our formal presentations from MPI today. Nobody has asked any questions. Are there any questions? You can pop your hand up figuratively. You can send using the Q&A or the chat feature. There are no questions come through. I'll give everybody
Rosemary,
yes.
James here.
Hello, James.
Can I ask a question of everyone?
Please.
Pushing everything offshore as far as treatments, was a big call. It seems to have worked fairly well from our side. There were a few challenges. I'm really interested to hear from yourselves. What was it like on your side? Was it easy to find a treatment provider close to or in location of the goods that you're shipping? Were there any challenges around getting certificates, logistics around the treatments?
I know that feedback I've had, James, is that there was difficulty in finding treatment providers and that there were inconsistencies in standards applied between treatment providers and somebody's come in now and said offshore treatment in Canada was a challenge. Next comment was prices increased when temperature dropped from fumigation to heat. Anybody else? No other comment? I've got a question here. Is that helpful, James?
Yes, it was. We thought it takes longer to... Sorry, I was just going to say it takes longer to heat treat as it gets colder and to get things up to temperature for fumigation as well. So I guess it makes sense that prices would go up with that.
And now we've got a comment that treatment in Japan was a problem. Now I have a question for the 1750 sensitive goods treatment exempt containers directed for MPI supervised DVAN. Do you know how many were found with BMSB alive or dead? Is this a Dunya question?
I don't know. I would have to go and have a look, to be really honest. But I can note it down and give that to you as an answer, unless somebody online knows. James, do you know, or Rachel or Paul?
No, I haven't got that.
I wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
I think we'll have to look into the data afterwards.
Yep.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Good question.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Could I, just to give some update on the treatment program, because it's a joint program between us and Australia. And leading into the 2021 season, we'll be requiring all treatment providers to reapply again like we did last year. And currently there's a range of online training modules that are being developed between us and Australia that the treatment suppliers will need to do as well. So there's a whole lot of extra checks and balances that will be in place leading into the 2021 year. The comment about Canada was interesting. What we found with Canada was a couple of treatment providers in Canada were bending the rules a little bit and saying to exporters that everything needs to be treated, and that was quickly dispelled, and the Canadian CFIA was involved with that and rectified the situation.
Thank you. And a comment I've had feedback from, and I think it was an Italian treatment provider, is that this particular treatment provider was looking for a space in a 20-foot container that somebody could walk through.
Right.
And then, you know, precisely how were containers expected to be packed so that treatment could be effective, and you know, a walk-through gap in a 20-footer loses significant amount of product for packing.
That's far too much space. All the space requirements need to enable the gas or air to move around to get everywhere in the container and all the goods.
Sure. So just that's feedback for you to include in this training program, please.
Yeah.
But we will be also making comment about that in our submission.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, woodwear is not part of the VMP requirements. No, answer to a question there by James.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Rosemary, sorry, it's just James here. Lucky I've got an expert sitting next to me. So only a single BMSB was found in a container of sensitive cargo, but there were a small number of other containers that had other stink bugs.
Excellent, thank you. Is it possible for you to do a report, a verbal or a written report that we could share with members, please?
We need to look into it, but I'll get back to you on that.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
There's no more questions and comments, so I'd like to say thank you so much to our MPI presenters. It is very helpful to have this type of reporting to members, and I'm delighted to see that there were over 50 people participating in the webinar today, and it just makes it, the technology has made this possible, and so we are looking forward to being able to deliver other update information. And if you're wanting more information on particular topics, I invite you to drop us an email, and we will work to identify appropriate presenters. I know that there's a presentation by New Zealand Customs in the pipeline, so just watch out for information about that as it's pulled together. Thank you everybody for your participation today, and look forward to seeing you next time on Zoom. Oh, there's one question that's come out, sorry. Dunya said that compared with previous season, there were very few arrival delays. It's worth mentioning that those delays are still happening. They were at origin instead. So I think that's probably a COVID thing, but that's an assumption on my part. Okay, comment is not COVID, the response that's come back. So it would be helpful to have some thought to that.
It would be, sorry, Paul Hallett here. It would be good to get that back through the submissions. Okay. There's a way of capturing that in terms of what type of delays were involved, and if there's any way to understand Was it a lack of treatment supplier? Was it that the treatments were taking too long, or what was the driver behind it?
Right. Now we've got another comment here. Getting fumigators was challenging at times, and all the related infrastructure, and it's a lack of supplies.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It would be nice to put it in writing in your submission as well.
We will do that.
Yep.
So now, great. Thanks, Angela, for your comment, and we look forward to again bringing another information webinar to members. And I will ask Laura to close this webinar now.